at our home. We decided to do our Bible study outside because it's a really good day for it. The weather's perfect. And so what we're doing here is we're doing like what the Bible teaches in 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 15, where he says, "Study to show thyself approved unto God, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth." It's important for us to study this word. It's important for us to go through these scriptures and to see what he's telling us here so that we know and that we can rightly divide these things so that we don't get these things mixed up. And so that's the goal through all of this, is to be able to study these things together and to kind of know what to expect on certain things. The topic that I want to talk about today is, as I've got it titled, Things the Enemy Will Do to Take You Out of the Fight. We're going to look at just a couple of things that the devil or your enemy will do to try to take you out of the fight, to try to knock you off of your, to keep you from making it to your goal. And so the Bible teaches us that we should be aware of these things. If you read in 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 8, he says, "Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about, seeking whom he may devour." So the verse tells us what we should be doing. We should be aware of these things. We should be sober-minded. We should be aware of what's happening, because our adversary, the devil, he compares him to a roaring lion going around seeking whom he can take out of the fight, who he can devour. We see it in John 10:10. He says, "The thief cometh not but for to steal and to kill and to destroy. I am come that they might have life and that they might have it more abundantly." So this is what Jesus said while he was here on the earth. He made it very clear that he's here to give people life, and not just any old life, but he wants to give you an abundant life. He wants to give you purpose. He wants to give you a meaning. But he starts off saying, your adversary, the enemy, the devil, he compares him to a thief. And he said he comes to steal and to kill and to destroy. That's what he's here to do. He's here to keep you from making it to heaven. He wants to keep you from living the life that God's called you to live. He wants to discourage you, to distract you, all these different things. The last verse I want to read talking about that comes from 2 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 11. And he says, "Lest Satan should get an advantage of us, for we are not ignorant of his devices." He says you need to be careful of these certain things so that the devil does not get an advantage of you. He says, for we are not ignorant of his devices. We're not ignorant of his plan or what he's trying to do in our life. And when you look at that word ignorant, he just basically means that you lack knowledge. The definition for ignorant is lacking knowledge or awareness in general, uneducated. And so that's what we have to be careful of, is that we are not ignorant of what the enemy will try to do to us. We have to be aware of those things and know how to handle it so that we can be the people that God has called us to be. Just like we said, the purpose for studying the Bible and all of these things is so that we can rightly divide the word of truth. And so in doing that, I want to read out of the book of Nehemiah. Chapter 4 is where we're going to be reading today. And I want to go through two examples of this man, Nehemiah, who dealt with this in a physical sense. He dealt with this while he was here, because Nehemiah was the one that in the very beginning, he started out as the king's cupbearer. He worked for another king. So basically his job was to make sure that the king didn't get poisoned. He didn't die. Everything came through him first. That's kind of what his job was. And so in a sense, if you think about that, Nehemiah's life didn't really add up to be a whole lot during that time, because all they wanted to do was, if someone's going to get it, it's going to be him and not the king. That's kind of how they placed value on his life. Some say it was a good thing, but that's kind of the way I look at it, is this man was just a cupbearer for a king. But one day, some people came to him and told him about the city of Jerusalem. They told him what kind of shape that it was in. And you can read that in chapter 1 of this book. But when they come to him and they told him that the city of Jerusalem, it said their walls were broken, their walls were busted up, it was all torn apart. It said the gates to their city had been burned. Everything was in ruins. It was all torn down. This made Nehemiah upset. This made him, he had a very big problem with what he was hearing. And so he made a decision within himself that he was going to go and rebuild that city. He wanted to take action and go rebuild the city that had been torn down and burnt to the ground. And that's exactly what he did. And I look at that as that's where people are at when they become Christians. When we get saved and when we start following God, that's where it starts. Is we have to make a decision within ourselves that, that's what we look like. We're torn down. We've been broken down. We've been burnt down. And we have to make a decision that we're going to go and do something different. We want to rebuild. We want to revive that city. So that's where Nehemiah is at. And I wanted to give you that background because you don't want to just jump into chapter 4 without kind of knowing what came before this. So that's where Nehemiah is. He's in a place to where he wasn't doing a whole lot, but when he heard that there was work that needed to be done, when he heard that the city of Jerusalem was torn apart, he made a decision that I'm going to go and do something that's right. And he asked God, he prayed to him and asked God to give him the strength and the ability to go get this job done. And that's what he did. Nehemiah was, God used this man to rebuild that city. And so we're going to look at that though, because when you make a decision to do something like this, not everyone's going to be in favor of it. Because just as God has people out there working, trying to do what's right, the devil also is trying to work against you to try to stop you from doing what you're supposed to do. We read that in 3 verses in the beginning, that the devil is looking to take people out of the fight. And so we're going to see that, just 2 examples of this in chapter 4. So we see Nehemiah, he's going in, his plan is to rebuild the city, to redo the gates, to get everything better, fixed. That way they have a way to defend themselves. But it says in chapter 4, verse 1, "But it came to pass that when Sanballat heard that we builded the wall, he was wroth and took great indignation and mocked the Jews." So when this leader, this king of another place, heard that they were wanting to go and rebuild that city of Jerusalem, he was angry. It says he was wroth, and he took great indignation and began to mock the Jews. And it says in verse 2, it says, "And he spake before his brethren and the army of Samaria and said, What do these feeble Jews? Will they fortify themselves? Will they sacrifice? Will they make an end in a day? Will they receive the stones out of the heaps of the rubbish which are burned?" So he's beginning to mock these Jewish men, this man like Nehemiah, and say, what are these feeble Jews actually going to do? He calls them names. He says they're feeble. He talks about how they're weak. What are they going to do? Are they going to go back to doing their sacrifice like they did before? Are they going to build some fortress for themselves? Are they actually going to revive the stones and all of basically it's just turned to nothing. It's just ruins. Are they actually going to build something once again? And I look at that and I say that's the way that our enemy does to us today. When you make a decision that I'm going to follow God and I'm going to do what God has called me to do, you need to understand that the devil is also going to try to come along and whisper in your ear and try to discourage you and act like what you're doing, it'll never work. It'll never work. It's not going to, it's not going to amount to anything. That's the way the devil works. That's one of the things that he's going to do is he wants to come in and begin to mock you. He wants to try to discourage you and distract you. Because if these guys would have listened to these things, then what would have happened? They would not have completed that wall. They would not have rebuilt that city. They would not have had any, means of defense, no way to fight for themselves, if they would have listened to what their enemies were trying to tell them. If you read on in verse 3, it says, "Now Tobiah the Ammonite was by him, and he said, Even that which they build, if a fox go up, he shall even break down their stone wall." So he was mocking them as well, basically looking and saying, what they're building is so weak, some small animal, some little fox could jump on that wall and tear it down. They're calling them weak, feeble, it'll never work. They don't have the power, they don't have the ability, they don't have the material, they don't have the manpower, and that's what happens. That's what you have to understand, that the enemy will mock you as well. The devil will want to whisper in your ear, and he'll go through certain people, and they'll be used to do these same things, to try to whisper in your ear and say it'll never work. You may have a plan, you may feel that God is calling you to do something, but understand that the devil is going to try to come along and whisper in your ear and talk about you don't have the ability, you don't have the knowledge, you don't have the power, you don't have anything to do this certain thing. So you have to make a decision. How are you going to handle that when it happens? How are you going to address that problem when it comes your way? Understand, don't let this take you by surprise when this begins to happen. Once again, like the last verse that we read talking about this in Corinthians, lest Satan should get an advantage of us, for we are not ignorant of his devices. We understand that these things will happen, so do not let him take advantage of you. Don't let people get in the way of what God is actually calling you to do. And just like Nehemiah here, these other kings, these other armies, they began to mock him and say, what is he really going to do here? So here's what he says in verse 4. He says, "Hear, O our God, for we are despised, and turn their reproach upon their own head, and give them for a prey in the land of captivity. And cover not their iniquity, and let not their sin be blotted out from before thee, for they have provoked thee to anger before the builders." So Nehemiah just calls on to God, and he says, hear my prayer, Lord. These people, they've spoke against you, they've made you angry, and in other words, he's looking and saying, let these people, they're going to get caught in their own words. They're going to have to deal with what they're saying here. But in other words, they didn't get all caught up in it. They didn't let it discourage them or distract them, because in verse 6 he says this, "So built we the wall, and all the walls was joined together unto the half thereof, for the people had a mind to work." So he says, we turned it over to God when these problems came up, when people tried to discourage us, when the devil tried to whisper in our ear. We turned those things over to God. We're going to let God take care of these problems that we're facing. But what did we do? He says, we built the wall. We built the wall. And why? He said, because the people had a mind to work. The people that he had right there, they had focused in and they had made up their mind that we are going to complete this job that needs to be done. That's what we lack here in America today, is people that are focused on God. Imagine if we had people, once again, who were focused on God and doing what God has called us to do. We would be able to build walls. We would be able to revive things, to build that city, because we're focused on God. We don't let the devil come in and discourage us or distract us. When those things come up, we turn it over to God. We say, Lord, you're going to deal with those things. But as for us, we're going to keep on. We're going to build that wall, and we're going to make up our minds that we're focused on God. That's a big thing. And so, if you keep on reading, in verse 7, it talks about all these other kings when they got the news that they just kept on. They just built the wall. They weren't discouraged. It says in verse 7, "But it came to pass that when Sanballat and Tobiah and the Arabians and the Ammonites and the Ashdodites heard that the walls of Jerusalem were made up and the breaches began to be stopped, then they were very wroth." They were very angry with this news. They tried to discourage them. They tried to talk bad about them. But when they just kept going and all of a sudden the walls are starting to be formed and the holes are starting to be filled in, and this city is starting to turn into a city once again, things are actually starting to look good for these people. It says all these leaders and kings looked and they said, well, this isn't good at all. It made them very angry to see these things. And so here's the next thing that they do. And this is going to be the next thing that the devil will try to do to you. If he can't discourage you, if he can't whisper in your ear and knock you off your goal or keep you from reaching your goal, it says, "And conspired all of them together to come and to fight against Jerusalem and to hinder it." So when they couldn't discourage them, he said, now we're going to make threats. They all joined together and began to conspire and talk about how they're going to come and they're going to fight against this city. They're going to tear them down. We're going to hinder the work. We're going to stop them from building those walls. And that's what the devil will do to you. If you're not careful, or if you don't let the devil or these things come and distract you, or, don't let it discourage you, the next thing is he's going to try to stop you. He's going to try to put things in your path to come and fight against you. But one thing that's really good is when you look in verse 9, it says this, "Nevertheless, we made our prayer unto our God and set a watch against them day and night because of them." So when you read that, he says, nevertheless, they have tried to discourage us, but we'll keep on building. They have made threats against us. They say they're going to fight against us, but nevertheless, we will make our prayers unto our God and we will set a watch against them. That's a good example of how these men here were not ignorant of what their enemies could do. They weren't just going around looking and saying, it's no big deal. No, they were prepared. They were ready. If they had to fight, they were willing to do so. They weren't ignorant of it, but they did not let that stop them from doing what God had called them to do. The enemy is more angry. The enemy he's more fired up. He's ready to come after you. But don't ever let these things stop you from being who God has called you to be. He's called you to, if it's to preach His Word, don't let anything stop you from doing that. Being a good example to others around you. Shine in your light like God says in the Bible. He says, "Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven." So that's what we should be doing, is shining our light. And the enemy doesn't like that. He doesn't want you to lead people to Christ. Notice in that verse he says that when you shine a light, when people see your good works, they're going to glorify your Father. God gets all the glory for those things. So he's saying that's what you should be doing. But when the devil hears that, he's going to come against you. But don't let that stop you from doing what's right. And so these men didn't let it stop them, but they were prepared. They were ready. They were not ignorant. If you read on down, we're going to skip down to verse 14, and it says this. It says, "And I looked and rose up and said unto the nobles and to the rulers and to the rest of the people, Be not ye afraid of them. Remember the Lord, which is great and terrible, and fight for your brethren, your sons and your daughters, your wives and your houses." So in verse 14, Nehemiah looked, he rose up, he looked at all the noblemen, all the rulers, all the people that he had working with him, and he said, be not afraid of them. Don't let these things discourage you. Don't let these things hurt you. But what does he say? Remember the Lord. That's something you should write down, is remember the Lord. When you're in times of trouble, remember the Lord. When you're being threatened, remember the Lord. When you're being tempted, remember the Lord. And when these things come up, he says, Just like he told these men, fight for your brothers, fight for your sons, your children, your families, your homes. That's what we lack. That's what people need to get back to, is fighting for what's right. We have so many scriptures that teach us to contend for the faith. As we're doing here, studying these things, we want to be ready for when these things come our way. We want to remember the Lord. And when the devil comes, we fight for what's right. We stand up for truth. And I like that. I like that word, and remember the Lord. You know, when people are afraid, what did Jesus say? He says, be not afraid. So we should remember that. When you're tempted to do something you shouldn't do, what did Jesus do? In Matthew chapter 4, when the devil come to him and tempted him 3 times in that wilderness, every time he said, it is written. He always dealt with temptation by going back to the Bible and saying, this is what His Word says. It is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God. That's how every time when he was faced with a problem, he always went back to what this book right here teaches us. So, when you're tempted, remember how Jesus dealt with it. He used the Scripture. Remember that the Lord will fight for you. There are so many stories throughout, even including the Old Testament, where they were faced with battles, but they went in and they won those battles because the Lord was working on their side. Verse 15, it says this, and it came to pass when our enemies heard that it was known unto us, and God had brought their counsel to naught, that we returned all of us to the wall, every one unto his work. So they tried to discourage them and it didn't work. They tried to threaten them and all they did was prepare themselves. They were willing to fight and they continued to work. And when their enemies heard that it wasn't working for them, that God had put these things to rest, these men went right back to work and they continued doing what God had called them to do. They continued becoming stronger and more able to defend themselves. If you read, I want to go to verse 17, he says this, they which builded on the wall, and they that bear burdens with those that laded, every one with one of his hands wrought in the work, and with the other hand held a weapon. That's how they continued to build this wall. They were not ignorant that their enemy, he might come up, they might try to tear them down. So they were willing to fight. They had a sword in one hand, but they continued to work with the other. Verse 18, for the builders, every one had his sword girded by his side, and so builded. And he that sounded the trumpet was by me. This is what Nehemiah is writing. That's who we believe the author of this book is, this Nehemiah. And so he's saying, the guys that were building, they had a weapon, they had a sword on their side. They were willing to use it if it come down to it, but they did not let it stop them from their work. And that's what people need to be doing today. They need to get back to these things right here. Once again, I want to go back to the verse, lest Satan should get an advantage of us, for we are not ignorant of his devices. We understand what he may try to do, how he may try to word things. He may try to, persuade you, discourage you, manipulate you, whatever. Don't be ignorant of these things. Understand, don't lack wisdom on these things. You're aware of your surroundings. You're aware of what's coming. So be ready for it. And trust that God will fight for you. Now you may say, well, how can we prepare for these things? Because remember, when you talk about the word ignorant, he says you lack understanding or you lack wisdom, you're unlearned, you're uneducated. So how do we get back to that? Well, in James chapter 1, verse 5, he says, if any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God, that giveth to all men liberally, and upbraideth not, and it shall be given him. So if you lack wisdom on these things, if you say, I'm faced with a situation, I don't know how to get past it, he says, if you are lacking wisdom, let him ask of God. Don't you see the track record here? When Nehemiah was faced with discouragement, he said to God, Lord, you deal with it. We're going to continue to work. He asked of God. When the threats came in, he told the men to prepare themselves for war if it came, but we were going to turn this thing over to God and we're going to stay focused on our goal. Just like James tells us, if you lack wisdom, you need to ask God, and He will give it to you freely. He will give it to you. It says, if you'll ask, it shall be given him. And I think that's really good. You know, when you look at the end goal, when you read through some of these other chapters, there's so many more things that they faced. These kings later on, they tried to trap Nehemiah. I believe it was even 5 times. What they ended up doing was saying, well, let's meet here. Let's go over here and we'll talk to you about these things. And Nehemiah said, I'm not going because you guys are going to try to kill me. It's a trap. He was aware of what these guys were capable of. So it wasn't always easy. It was a battle for him. There were a lot of times he was faced with much opposition. But the end result is that Nehemiah completed that wall and rebuilt those walls, those gates, within 52 days. That short amount of time, he was able to complete the job that he was called to do. He went from a guy that was a cupbearer, not doing a whole lot, but when he saw a need, when he knew that they were, burnt, they were busted, it wasn't going well for him, he prayed to God, he asked God to strengthen him, and he focused on God until the job was done. And 52 days later, they were restored. The city was rebuilt. No matter the discouragement, no matter all the problems that they faced, all the threats, all the traps, all of these things that came up, they stayed focused on what God called them to do, and they ended up completing the job that they were meant to do. And I think that's what we need. I know that right there is what we need to get back to today. People today, they've lost their way. They're not focused on God anymore. They're just focused on everything going on around them. And we talk about it a lot. It's like Peter when he was out on that water and Jesus called him to walk on the water towards him. And as he started going, he was doing it. He was walking on the water and he was making his way towards Jesus. But when he started focusing on how big the winds and the waves were, it frightened him. It made him afraid. And it says he began to sink. When he took his eyes off of Jesus, he began to go down. And that right there is what we need to be careful of today. Do not be ignorant of the devil's devices. Understand that just as God is calling people to do what's right, the devil will try to put people in your path. He will try to whisper in your ear. He'll tell you you'll never make it. You'll never be able to do it. You don't have the ability. You don't understand the Scripture. All of these things. Don't be ignorant of those things. Don't let these things discourage you. Keep your eyes set on Jesus. Stay focused on your goal. And if you will, you'll turn out just like these other men here who stayed focused and they completed the task that God had for them. So that's the study that I wanted to do out of Nehemiah chapter 4 to show some examples of how these men, even all the way back in the Old Testament, were faced with problems. But when they dealt with these things in the right way, the correct way, they come out on top. And they ended up doing exactly what God called them to do. And that's an example of how we can be today. We have to make up our minds. Just like in the very beginning when Nehemiah had to make up his mind. Was he going to stay in the position he was in? Some even would have looked at being the king's cupbearer as, man, that's a privilege. That's a good job to have. You're kind of like his right-hand man. But he was willing to leave all of that to go rebuild a broken city. And that's where we're at today. We have to make up our minds. Are we going to be focused on Jesus? Are we going to be focused on God? Are we going to study these Scriptures and know what God expects of us? If we're lacking wisdom, where are we going to get it? Who are we going to turn to? The Scriptures tells us. In James chapter 4, verse 10, he says, "Humble yourself in the sight of the Lord, and he shall lift you up." You come to God just like Nehemiah did and say, I don't have all the answers. You know, these things are broken. Lord, help us. Lord, give us the power. Give us the strength to move on. If you lack wisdom, come to God. You can ask Him. And He'll give you the strength and the ability to press on and to come out on top. So that's all that I have for the study. And so what I want to do is just close with a prayer and then we'll be done. Lord, I come before you today and I thank you for giving us this good weather to be able to study this word out here, Lord, and to enjoy your creation. But Lord, more importantly, I just come before you and ask that you will help us, Lord, that you will give us the power and the ability to overcome these problems and these distractions that we face in our lives, Lord. Help us to stay focused on you. Help us, Lord, to keep our eyes fixed on you at all times. And that way, all of these things that the enemy will try to throw our way, they won't touch us, Lord, but we'll be prepared and we'll be ready to handle these things according to your word. And so, Lord, I thank you for this day. I thank you for this study. And Lord, I just pray that you will use these words to help anyone that will hear them, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen.